In the quiet corners of suburbia, behind manicured lawns and picture-perfect smiles, the darkest truths often lie buried. We tell ourselves that monsters are the stuff of nightmares, figures that lurk in the shadows of our imagination. But sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we invite into our homes, the ones we trust, the ones we love. What happens when a bond between a daughter and a mother is not just broken, but methodically, brutally erased? What happens when a young girl's love becomes so twisted, so poisoned, that she is willing to commit the ultimate act of betrayal? The story you are about to hear is one of chilling manipulation, of a love that curdled into a terrifying obsession, and of a crime so horrific it defies comprehension. It is the story of the girl who ruthlessly ground her mother's body to be with her stepfather. This is a journey into the heart of darkness, a place where family ties become chains, and a home becomes a tomb. Before we unearth the terrible secrets hidden within, take a moment to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. You won't want to miss a single detail of this harrowing tale. The house on Sycamore Lane was a portrait of tranquil domesticity. It was a two-story colonial with crisp white siding and shutters the color of a summer sky. In the spring, Helena's prized azaleas would burst into a riot of pink and fuchsia along the stone walkway. In the autumn, the ancient maple tree in the front yard would set itself ablaze in shades of gold and crimson, shedding a carpet of leaves that Alara, even at 17, still enjoyed crunching through. To any passerby, the house and the family within it was the very embodiment of the suburban dream. Inside, the illusion was just as meticulously maintained. The scent of lemon polish and freshly baked bread often hung in the air, a testament to Helena's tireless efforts to create a perfect home. She was a woman built of quiet strength and gentle hands, her love for her daughter, Alara, as constant and unassuming as the ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer. Helena had raised Alara on her own for the first 12 years of her life after a messy, painful divorce that she rarely spoke of. Those years had forged a bond between them that Helena believed was unbreakable. They were a unit, a fortress of two against the world. Then, 5 years ago, Marcus had entered their lives, and the fortress had opened its gates. He was a whirlwind, a handsome, charismatic architect with a smile that could disarm armies and a voice like warm honey. He'd met Helena at a charity gala, and within 6 months, he was a permanent fixture in the house on Sycamore Lane. He hadn't just courted Helena, he had courted Alara, too. He'd brought her books by her favorite obscure authors, learned the names of every character in her fantasy video games, and listened with rapt attention to her teenage anxieties, never once making her feel childish or foolish. He didn't try to be her father, he was far too clever for that. He positioned himself as something much more potent. A friend, a confidant, the one person in the world who truly got her. "Your mom is amazing," he told Alara one evening, as they sat on the porch swing, watching the fireflies begin their nightly ballet. Helena was inside, humming as she washed the dinner dishes. "She's the most decent person I've ever met. But she's from a different world, you know? A simpler time. She doesn't always see the complexities, the shades of gray that people like you and I live in." At the time, Alara had felt a swell of pride. Marcus was including her in his world of adult complexities, a world her mother, with her simple, unwavering moral compass, couldn't fully access. It was the first of 1,000 tiny wedges he would drive between them, each one so small, so seemingly insignificant, that neither mother nor daughter felt the fissure widening until it was a chasm. The manipulation was a masterclass in subtlety. It began with shared secrets. "Let's not mention this to your mom," he'd say with a conspiratorial wink after letting Alara stay out an hour past her curfew. "She worries so much, and we don't want to upset her, do we?" He framed it as an act of kindness, of protecting Helena from unnecessary stress. But the true purpose was to create a secret world that belonged only to him and Alara, a world where Helena was the outsider, the one who needed to be managed. He slowly began to reframe Alara's perception of her mother. Helena's quiet nature, once a source of comfort for Alara, was recast by Marcus as emotional distance. "She loves you more than anything, Laurie," he'd say, using his special pet name for her. "But she has a hard time showing it. She keeps so much bottled up inside. I worry about her. He made Alara feel that she, too, should worry, and that her mother's love was something fragile and flawed, something that required his expert interpretation. A conversation about college became a prime example of his artistry. Alara had her heart set on an art school on the West Coast, a dream she had nurtured for years. Helena, ever practical, was concerned about the distance and the cost. It's not that I don't believe in you, sweetheart, Helena had said, her brow furrowed with genuine concern as they sat at the polished oak dining table. It's just so far away. And the tuition. We have to be realistic. Later that evening, Marcus found Alara sketching moodily in her room. He leaned against the doorframe, his expression a perfect blend of sympathy and understanding. Tough conversation, huh? He began. Alara just shrugged, not looking up from her sketchbook. Look, I get it. Your mom is just cautious. It's not that she wants to hold you back. She's just scared. When you've been through what she has, the world looks like a dangerous place. She sees letting you go as losing you. It's a kind of selfish love in a way. Not intentionally, of course. It's just her fear for herself gets tangled up in her love for you. He let the words hang in the air. Selfish love. The phrase was a poison dart, and it found its mark. Alara had never considered her mother's love selfish. It had always been the bedrock of her existence. But Marcus had planted a seed of doubt, and it began to sprout in the fertile ground of her adolescent desire for independence. Suddenly, her mother's practical concerns seemed less like love and more like a cage. Marcus became the champion of her dreams. He secretly bought her a top-of-the-line portfolio case and helped her curate her application pieces. We'll figure out the money, he'd whispered. I'll work some extra projects. We won't let her fears clip your wings. This will be our project. Our secret. Their secrets multiplied, weaving a web of intimacy that excluded Helena completely. They developed their own inside jokes, their own shorthand. He'd catch her eye across the dinner table and give a barely perceptible shake of his head when Helena said something he deemed naive or old-fashioned. A silent communication that said, "You and I know better." Helena wasn't oblivious, not entirely. She could feel her daughter slipping away. The easy laughter they once shared was replaced by a polite, strained distance. Alara's bedroom door, once always ajar, was now perpetually closed. When Helena tried to talk to her, Alara's answers were clipped and non-committal, her eyes darting away as if she were hiding something. "Is everything all right with you and Alara?" Helena asked Marcus one night as they lay in bed. The question was tentative, freighted with a vulnerability she rarely showed. "She seems so distant lately, like she's angry with me." Marcus sighed, a long, mournful sound in the darkness. He turned and gathered her into his arms, stroking her hair. "Oh, honey, it's not you. It's just, she's 17. She's pulling away. It's what they do. And," he paused, as if carefully considering his words, "I think she feels a little suffocated sometimes. You're such a wonderful, attentive mother, but to a teenager, that can sometimes feel like pressure. She just needs some space to figure out who she is. Don't push her, Helena. Let her come to you. She'll be back." He was a brilliant strategist. He had not only identified the problem but had also prescribed a solution that would serve his purpose perfectly. By convincing Helena to give Alara space, he was ensuring that the vacuum would be filled by only one person, him. Helena, wanting to do the right thing, followed his advice. She backed off, giving Alara the space she supposedly needed, and in doing so, she unwittingly surrendered the last of her territory. The house on Sycamore Lane began to feel different. The air, once light and warm, now felt heavy with unspoken tensions. Meals became exercises in navigating conversational minefields. Alara would direct all her comments and questions to Marcus, while Helena would try to interject, her contributions often falling into a polite but resounding silence. One Sunday afternoon, the tension finally snapped. Helena had found a brochure for the state university, just an hour's drive away, on the kitchen counter. It was open to the page for the graphic design program. "Oh, Laurie, this looks wonderful," Helena had said, her voice bright with forced cheerfulness. Their design program is one of the best in the region, and you'd be close enough to come home on weekends. Alara, who was making a smoothie, didn't even turn around. I'm not going to the state university. Well, it's just good to have options, honey. A backup plan. I don't need a backup plan, Alara said, the edge in her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Marcus already told me he'd help me with the tuition for CalArts. We have a plan. Helena's smile faltered. She looked from her daughter's rigid back to Marcus, who was sitting at the table, watching the exchange with a look of detached concern. You two have a plan? You discussed this without me? It wasn't like that, Marcus said smoothly, stepping in as the peacemaker. Alara was just expressing her concerns, and I was trying to reassure her. I told her we'd make it work, whatever she decided. As a family. But it's not a family decision if I'm not part of the conversation. Helena's voice rose, a rare occurrence. She's my daughter, Marcus. I get a say in her future. Alara finally spun around, her face a mask of fury. Why? So you can tell me my dreams are unrealistic? So you can try to keep me trapped here in this boring little town for the rest of my life? Trapped? Helena looked genuinely wounded. I have never tried to trap you. I have only ever tried to protect you. Protect me? Or control me? Alara shot back, the words laced with a venom that was not her own. They were Marcus's words, his insidious whispers, now given voice. Marcus is the only one who actually listens to me. He's the only one who believes in me. She stormed out of the kitchen, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Helena sank into a chair, her face pale. She looked at Marcus, her eyes pleading for an explanation, for comfort. He came to her, kneeling by her chair and taking her hands in his. His touch was gentle, his voice a soothing balm. I'm so sorry, my love. I shouldn't have said anything to her without talking to you first. I was just trying to help. You see how wound up she is? How she twists things. This is that teenage rebellion I was talking about. She's lashing out. She's looking for a villain, and right now that's you. It's not fair, but it's normal. We just have to ride it out. Together. He was framing it as Alara's problem, as a phase, while simultaneously reinforcing his own position as the calm, rational center of the family. He comforted Helena, all the while knowing he was the one who had supplied his stepdaughter with the ammunition. Helena, lost in a sea of confusion and hurt, clung to him, the architect of her own isolation. The final, decisive event that cemented the toxic alliance between Alara and Marcus came a few weeks later. It was a fabricated crisis, a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. Marcus had been working late several nights in a row, coming home exhausted and withdrawn. He began dropping hints about financial trouble, about a major client pulling out of a project. He would sigh heavily over the bills at the end of the month, rubbing his temples as if battling a migraine. Helena, naturally, was concerned. Talk to me, Marcus. We're a team. We can get through this together. I don't want to burden you, Helena, he'd say, his voice heavy with false nobility. It's my job to provide, to make sure you and Alara are taken care of. He was, of course, confiding the full story to Alara. He told her they were on the brink of ruin, that his firm was about to collapse. He swore her to secrecy. Your mother. She couldn't handle it, he said, his eyes filled with a manufactured despair. She's not strong in that way. The stress would break her. We have to protect her from this, Laurie. It's up to you and me. He had transformed a non-existent financial crisis into a crucible for their bond. They were now partners, co-conspirators in a noble lie designed to protect the fragile Helena. The climax of his performance was a staged phone call. He took it in his home office, leaving the door slightly ajar so Alara could overhear. His voice was tense, pleading with some unseen client. No, you don't understand. I've put everything into this. Please, there has to be another way. He slammed the phone down and then, for Alara's benefit, let out a choked sob. She rushed into the room. Marcus? What is it? What happened? He looked up at her, his face a picture of devastation. He told her it was over, that they were going to lose everything. The house, the cars, her college fund. Everything. But what about Mom? Alara whispered, her heart pounding. I don't know, he said, his voice cracking. I don't know how I'm going to tell her. She's going to fall apart. She invested so much of her savings into the house after the divorce. It's all gone. He had cleverly woven a thread of truth into his tapestry of lies. Helena had invested her savings, a fact that would make the impending loss all the more devastating and, crucially, all her fault in some twisted way. He looked Alara directly in the eyes, his own shining with unshed tears. The only thing that matters, the only thing is that we stay together. You and me. We're strong. We can handle this. But we have to be her rock. In that moment, Alara's transformation was nearly complete. Her mother was no longer her protector, her confidant, her bedrock. She was a liability, a fragile, emotional creature who had to be managed and protected by the two truly strong people in the family, her and Marcus. Her love for her mother was still there, but it was now a pitying, condescending love. Her primary loyalty, her fierce, unwavering devotion, now belonged to the man who had so skillfully stolen it. Later that night, as Alara lay in bed, her mind racing, Marcus came to her room. He sat on the edge of her bed, just as he had done so many times before. But this time, his demeanor was different. There was an intensity in his gaze, a darkness that she had never seen before. There might be one way out of this, he said, his voice barely a whisper. A way to save everything. How? She asked, her voice full of desperate hope. He looked at the closed door, then back at her. Your mother has a life insurance policy, a very substantial one, from before we were married. The words hung in the air, cold and heavy. Alara didn't understand. Her life insurance? What does that have to do with anything? Marcus reached out and took her hand. His grip was firm, almost painful. Think about it, Laurie. She's so unhappy, so stressed. She tries to hide it, but we see it, don't we? We see the sadness in her eyes. The world is too much for her. What if she could be at peace? And what if, in finding her peace, she could give us the means to survive? To stay together, in this house, and build the future you deserve. Alara stared at him, her mind struggling to process the monstrous thing he was suggesting. He wasn't saying the word murder, but he didn't have to. The implication was as clear as the moonlight streaming through her window. He was talking about her mother's death as a solution, a noble sacrifice. And the most terrifying part was that, in the twisted, isolated world that he had so carefully constructed for her, a world where her mother was a fragile burden and he was her only true ally, it almost horrifyingly made a kind of sense. The perfect family portrait on the mantelpiece downstairs was a lie. The truth was here, in the shadows of her bedroom, where a monstrous idea was being born. The seed of the idea, once planted, did not sprout overnight. It was a slow, insidious germination, nurtured in the dark by Marcus's constant, whispered affirmations. He never used ugly words like kill or murder. Instead, he spoke of release, of peace, of a merciful end to her suffering. He was a poet of psychopathy, and Alara was his captive audience. He began a campaign to prove Helena's profound unhappiness, a campaign so subtle and effective that Alara became its chief witness. He would provoke quiet, simmering arguments with Helena over trivialiest way she loaded the dishwasher, a bill she'd forgotten to pay, and then later, he would find Alara and recount the exchange with a heavy heart. You see how on edge she is? He'd say, his voice thick with feigned sorrow. The smallest thing sets her off. She's just not coping, Laurie. It breaks my heart to see her this way. He would point out the dark circles under Helena's eyes, circles that were there because she was now sleeping fitfully, sensing the discord in her home even if she couldn't name its source. She looked so tired of fighting, Marcus would murmur. Just tired of it all. He made Alara see her mother not as a victim of his own psychological warfare, but as a woman crumbling under the weight of her own existence. The shared psychotic disorder, the folie à deux, began to take hold. Alara's reality was no longer her own. It was a reflection of Marcus's. She started to interpret every one of her mother's actions through the distorted lens he had provided. If Helena made her favorite dinner, it wasn't an act of love. It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to cling to a daughter who had outgrown her. If Helena asked about her day, it wasn't motherly interest. It was an intrusive interrogation, a sign of her controlling nature. If Helena smiled, her smile didn't reach her eyes, a clear sign of the deep, hidden despair Marcus had so expertly described. Their world shrank. Friends who came over were met with a cool, united front from Alara and Marcus, making them feel like intruders. Soon, the invitations stopped. The house on Sycamore Lane became a sealed environment, an echo chamber where Marcus's delusions were amplified and validated by his young, impressionable acolyte. They were a cult of two, with Helena as the unwitting designated sacrifice. "She's trapping us," Marcus said one evening. They were in the garage, a space that had become their sanctuary, their war room. He was ostensibly showing her how to change the oil in his car, but the conversation, as always, circled back to their central obsession. "She's a weight, Laurie. A beautiful, tragic weight that's pulling us both under. We can't be free, truly free, as long as she's here. You know that, don't you?" Alara, wiping grease from her hands with a rag, nodded slowly. The idea no longer shocked her. It had been normalized through endless repetition. It now felt less like a monstrous transgression and more like a sad necessity, a painful but logical solution to an impossible problem. The love she had for her mother had been so thoroughly corrupted that it now manifested as a twisted form of pity. Death, as Marcus had framed it, would be a kindness. What would we do?" she asked, her voice a low whisper, though there was no one to hear them. Marcus stopped what he was doing and looked at her, his expression deadly serious. "It would have to be perfect," he said. "No mistakes. It would have to look like an accident. Or like she just decided to leave. To walk away from it all." And so the planning began. It was a meticulous, cold-blooded affair that they approached with the detached focus of architects designing a building. Marcus, with his methodical mind, broke it down into phases. The method, the disposal, the alibi. Alara, with her artistic eye for detail, helped to flesh out the narrative, to make the fiction of their story believable. They spent hours online using incognito browsers on Alara's laptop. Their search histories would have been a roadmap to their dark intentions. Common household accidents, fastest-acting poisons, how to dissolve bone, best way to clean blood from grout. They learned that poison was too traceable. A staged fall down the stairs was too unpredictable. They needed something controllable, something final. The idea for the method came from one of the true crime documentaries they began to watch together, a new, morbid hobby that bonded them further. "For research," Marcus would say with a grim smile. In one episode, a character had been subdued with a powerful sedative. "That's it," Marcus had said, his eyes gleaming. "We sedate her. Heavily. She just goes to sleep. No pain, no fear. It's the most humane way." He was a doctor's son. He knew his way around medical terminology. He researched sedatives and found one that was commonly prescribed for severe anxiety condition he had already spent months convincing Alara her mother suffered from. He then coached Alara on how to feign symptoms of extreme panic attacks to their family doctor, Dr. Albright. It was a chilling performance. Alara, a naturally gifted actress, was convincing. She spoke of a racing heart, of an irrational fear of crowds, of an inability to sleep. She was prescribed a small dose of the very sedative Marcus had researched. Over 2 subsequent visits, she complained that the dosage was too low, that her panic was getting worse. Dr. Albright, a kind, overworked man who had known her since she was a child, reluctantly increased the prescription twice. They amassed a lethal quantity, pill by pill. The disposal was the most grotesque part of their plan, the part that required a complete and utter severing of any remaining human empathy. It was also the part that gave their crime its horrific, defining signature. Marcus had an old, industrial-grade wood chipper that he kept at a small, remote property his firm owned deep in the countryside, a remnant from a land-clearing project. It was a monstrous machine of steel and blades, designed to reduce massive tree limbs to a spray of fine mulch. "Nothing left," Marcus explained in a flat, clinical tone as they stood in the garage one night. "No body, no evidence. We take her there. We reduce her to organic matter, and then we spread the matter in the forest. She'll become part of the earth." It's almost poetic in a way. He had a sociopath's gift for reframing horror as poetry. He was convincing Alara that they weren't just committing a murder. They were performing a sacred, quasi-spiritual rite of returning her mother to nature. Alara's role was to procure the tools for the cleanup. Under the guise of a morbid art project for her portfolio, a series on suburban decay, she bought large quantities of industrial-strength bleach, heavy-duty plastic sheeting, contractor bags, and several sets of chemical-resistant overalls, gloves, and booties from a hardware store in a neighboring town, paying in cash. She even sketched out her project in her notebook, a series of dark, abstract sculptures, in case anyone ever asked. She was creating her own alibi, her own cover story, with a chillingly creative flair. Their alibi for the night itself was simple but, they believed, effective. Helena had been planning a weekend trip to visit her sister 2 states away. They would simply let her go. They would help her pack. They would wave goodbye as she supposedly drove off on a Friday morning. Their story would be that she never arrived. They would wait a respectable amount of time Sunday evening before reporting her missing, playing the part of the increasingly frantic family. The date was set for the first Friday in November. The days leading up to it were surreal. The house on Sycamore Lane became a stage, and they were all playing their parts in a tragedy whose script only 2 of them had read. Marcus was more attentive and loving to Helena than ever before, bringing her flowers, complimenting her cooking, holding her hand as they watched television. It was a nauseatingly brilliant performance, designed to lull her into a state of absolute security. Alara, for her part, found it harder to act. The woman she saw, laughing at one of Marcus's jokes, carefully folding laundry, humming a tune that she'd sung to Alara as a child, this was her mother. Brief, terrifying flashes of reality would break through the fog of Marcus's influence. A memory of her mother teaching her to ride a bike, of her mother holding her as she cried over her first broken heart. In those moments, the sheer monstrosity of what they were about to do would threaten to overwhelm her. But then Marcus would catch her eye, give her a subtle, knowing nod, and the fog would roll back in. He was her anchor, her reality. He would touch her shoulder, a small gesture of solidarity, and the doubts would recede. He was the cure for her conscience. On the Thursday night before the murder, the 3 of them had dinner together. It was Helena's favorite, roast chicken with rosemary potatoes. The conversation was light, focused on Helena's upcoming trip. "Now, you be good while I'm gone," Helena said, wagging a playful finger at Alara and Marcus. "No wild parties." "We'll be the very picture of responsibility," Marcus said, smiling his easy smile. He reached across the table and squeezed Helena's hand. "We'll miss you, though. Drive safe. Okay?" "I will," she said, her eyes shining with an uncomplicated love for the man who was planning to kill her. Later that night, Alara found she couldn't sleep. She crept downstairs for a glass of water. The house was dark and silent, but as she passed the living room, she saw a faint light from under the door. She pushed it open a crack. Helena was sitting on the sofa, bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp, a photo album open on her lap. She was looking at pictures from Alara's childhood. A small, sad smile played on her lips. Alara felt a lump form in her throat. This was her last chance. She could walk in there, confess everything, and shatter the nightmare. But as she stood, frozen in the hallway, she felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Marcus. He had followed her downstairs. He said nothing. He just looked from Alara to her mother on the sofa, and then back to Alara. His expression was cold, hard, a silent command. "Remember the plan. Remember why we're doing this. Don't be weak." He squeezed her shoulder, a gesture of control, not comfort, and then guided her back toward the stairs. The moment passed. The door to salvation had closed. The next morning, Friday, was a flurry of activity. Helena packed her overnight bag, while Marcus discovered a slow leak in one of her tires. "You can't drive on this, honey," he'd said with grave concern. "Tell you what, take my car. It's safer and the gas tank is full." It was a crucial part of the plan. Helena's car needed to remain at the house to complete the illusion that she had simply vanished from there. The final act began at dinner. Alara had cooked, following one of her mother's recipes. Marcus opened a bottle of wine. "A little send-off for our traveler," he announced, pouring 3 glasses. While Helena was in the other room taking a call from her sister to confirm her arrival time the next day, Marcus moved with swift, silent precision. He took the glass he had poured for Helena, and from his pocket, he produced a small vial. Inside were the crushed pills, a fine white powder. He emptied the contents into the wine, swirling it gently until it dissolved. He placed the glass back in its exact spot on the table. When Helena returned, smiling, he raised his own glass. "To my beautiful wife," he said. "Have a wonderful trip. We'll be counting the hours until you're back." They all drank. Helena commented that the wine tasted a little bitter, but Marcus laughed it off. "It's a cheap bottle, I'm afraid. My apologies." They ate dinner, the conversation stilted, the air thick with an almost unbearable tension. Alara could barely swallow her food. She watched her mother, every movement, every breath, waiting for the drug to take effect. It began about 20 minutes later. Helena yawned. "Wow, I'm suddenly so tired," she said, blinking slowly. "Must be all the rushing around today. Why don't you go lie down for a bit before you have to leave?" Marcus suggested, his voice dripping with false concern. "You've got a long drive ahead." The lie was audacious. They both knew she wasn't going anywhere. "Maybe just for a few minutes," Helena agreed. She stood up, but her legs were unsteady. She swayed, and Marcus was instantly at her side, holding her arm. "Whoa there. Easy does it," he said. He helped her to the sofa in the living room. Alara followed, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Helena lay down, her eyelids already fluttering. "Just feel so sleepy," she murmured, her words slurring. She looked up at Alara, her gaze unfocused but soft. "Love you, sweetie." It was the last thing she ever said. Alara just stood there, paralyzed, as her mother's breathing became deeper, slower. Marcus checked her pulse. He looked up at Alara, his face devoid of all emotion. "It's time," he said. What followed was a blur of nightmarish efficiency. They worked in near silence, a well-rehearsed team. They rolled Helena's now limp body onto a large plastic sheet they had hidden in the hall closet. Together, they carried her out the back door and into the garage, placing her in the back of Marcus's SUV. He then drove Helena's car a few blocks away and left it on a quiet side street, jogging back to the house. While he was gone, Alara's job was to erase any sign of what had happened. She washed the wine glasses and the dinner plates, her hands shaking so violently she was afraid she would break something. She wiped down the table, the counters, the doorknobs. She was erasing her mother. When Marcus returned, they put on the disposable overalls, gloves, and booties. They looked like a hazmat team about to enter a contaminated zone. And in a way, they were. They got into the SUV, the body of their wife and mother lying under a tarp in the back, and drove out of the pristine suburban neighborhood, leaving the perfect house on Sycamore Lane behind them as they headed into the deep, dark country. The drive was an hour of thick, suffocating silence. When they arrived at the remote property, the moon was high, casting long, skeletal shadows through the trees. Marcus backed the SUV up to the hulking form of the wood chipper. He turned on the SUV's headlights, illuminating the machine in a harsh, white glare. He turned to Alara, his voice low and steady. "I'll do this part. I just need you to help me get her out of the car." The horror of the moment was absolute. This was no longer an abstract plan, a whispered idea. This was real. This was the body of her mother, the woman who had given her life. A wave of nausea and terror washed over Alara. She thought she was going to be sick. She shook her head, backing away. I can't do it. Marcus's face hardened. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. Yes, you can, he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. We are in this together. Don't you fall apart on me now. Don't you dare be weak. Think of our future. Think of what she would have done to us. He was reinforcing the delusion, pulling her back from the precipice of reality. He needed her to be his accomplice, not just in thought, but in deed. He dragged her to the back of the SUV and threw open the hatch. And there, in the cold, clinical light, Alara did the unthinkable. She took hold of her mother's feet, the chill of death already seeping through the plastic, and helped the man she loved pull the body from the car. The madness for two was now being consecrated in a ritual of unimaginable brutality. Marcus fired up the chipper. The roar of the engine was deafening, a hellish scream that tore through the peaceful night. It devoured everything Marcus fed into it, spitting out a fine, dark mist. Alara stood frozen, her hands over her ears, her eyes wide with a horror that was so profound it felt like a dream. She watched as the man who had promised her freedom, who had poisoned her mind and stolen her soul, ruthlessly, methodically, ground her mother's body into nothingness. The roar of the wood chipper eventually died, replaced by an even more terrifying silence. The air was thick with a damp, coppery smell that clung to the back of Alara's throat. A fine, dark mulch coated the ground around the machine, a grotesque parody of garden landscaping. Marcus stood panting, his face spattered with the evidence of their crime. He looked not like a grieving husband, but like a laborer who had just completed a strenuous task. It's done, he said, his voice flat, matter-of-fact. Now, the cleanup. The next 2 hours were a meticulous exercise in erasing their existence from the scene. They used powerful bleach and scrub brushes on the chipper, cleaning every blade, every surface, until it gleamed under the moonlight. They shoveled the gruesome mulch into thick contractor bags. Then, they walked deep into the surrounding woods, scattering the contents of the bags over a wide area, letting the forest floor swallow the last physical remnants of Helena. They burned their overalls, gloves, and booties in a metal barrel until only a foul-smelling ash remained, which they also scattered. They were ghosts, leaving no trace. The drive back to Sycamore Lane was as silent as the drive out, but the silence had a different quality. It was no longer fraught with the tension of anticipation, but heavy with the weight of the irrevocable. Alara stared out the window, watching the world go by, feeling completely detached from it, as if she were watching a movie of someone else's life. The girl who had left this house hours ago no longer existed. In her place was something hollowed out, something cold. When they returned, the house was just as they had left it. Pristine, quiet, a perfect tomb. They showered meticulously, scrubbing their skin raw. As Alara stood under the scalding water, she looked at her hands, the same hands that had held her mother's cold feet. They looked no different. She felt a terrifying sense of dislocation. How could you participate in something so monstrous and not be physically marked by it? The performance began the next day. Marcus left a cheerful, rambling voicemail on Helena's phone. Hey, honey, just calling to see how the drive is going. Give us a call when you get a chance. Love you. Later, Alara sent a text. Hope you got there safe. Aunt Carol's cooking better not be better than mine. LOL. Miss you. They were creating a digital breadcrumb trail of normalcy, of a family who believed their loved one was simply on a trip. On Saturday evening, Marcus made a show of calling his sister-in-law, Carol. Alara listened to his side of the conversation, a masterclass in feigned concern. What do you mean she's not there? No, she left yesterday morning. Are you sure? Well, maybe she stopped at a hotel. Let's give it a few more hours. By Sunday evening, their manufactured worry had escalated into full-blown, theatrical panic. It was Marcus who made the 911 call, his voice expertly cracking with emotion. My wife. She never made it to her sister's house. We haven't heard from her in 2 days. Yes, we're terrified. The first police officers who arrived were two young, sympathetic patrolmen. They saw a handsome, distraught husband and a pale, red-eyed teenage daughter. They took a missing persons report, their questions gentle, their demeanor reassuring. I'm sure she's fine, sir. 99% of the time, there's a simple explanation. But the simple explanation never materialized. Within 2 days, the case was handed over to the detective squad. And that was when their carefully constructed world began to develop its first hairline crack. The crack had a name: Detective Isabella Rossi. She was a woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing and a weary cynicism born of 2 decades of seeing the worst of human nature. She had a knack for sensing when a story was just a little too polished, when the grief was a little too performative. She met with Marcus and Alara in the living room of the house on Sycamore Lane, the same room where Helena had taken her last breath. Marcus recounted their story, his voice choked with sorrow, his hand resting protectively on Alara's shoulder. Alara, for her part, played the role of the shattered daughter, her answers to Rossi's questions soft and monosyllabic. But Rossi noticed things. She noticed that while Marcus's eyes were filled with tears, they never seemed to quite reach his face. She noticed that when she asked Alara a direct question, the girl's eyes would flicker for a split second toward her stepfather, a subconscious check for approval, for the correct answer. And she noticed that for a family in the grips of a terrifying crisis, the house was immaculately, unervingly clean. Too clean. It smelled faintly of bleach. "You keep a very tidy home, Mr. Davies," Rossi commented, her tone casual. "My wife, Helena. She was always meticulous about cleanliness," Marcus replied smoothly, turning a potential red flag into a loving tribute. Rossi's investigation began to move outward. She spoke to Helena's sister, Carol, who was beside herself with grief and confusion. "Helena was so excited about the trip," Carol told her. "But it was strange. When I spoke to her Thursday night, she sounded a little down, distant, not like herself." She spoke to Helena's friends, who painted a picture of a woman who had become increasingly isolated over the past year. "We barely saw her anymore," one friend said. It was like Marcus and Alara were their own little island, and Helena wasn't on it. The first piece of tangible evidence came from a neighbor's security camera, the one blind spot Marcus hadn't accounted for. The camera, positioned on the corner of the street, captured Marcus's SUV, leaving the neighborhood at 10:17 p.m. on Friday night and returning at 3:42 a.m. on Saturday morning. It was a 5.5-hour window in the middle of the night that he couldn't explain. When Rossi confronted him with the footage, Marcus was momentarily thrown, but he recovered quickly. "I couldn't sleep," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I was worried about Helena being on the road so late. I drove for a while, to clear my head. I didn't want to wake Alara." It was a plausible lie, but it was a lie Rossi didn't buy. Why drive for 5 hours? And where? The next crack appeared in Alara. Rossi decided to interview her separately, at the police station, away from Marcus's suffocating influence. In the sterile, gray interview room, without Marcus to anchor her, Alara's composure began to fray. The delusional reality they had shared was harder to maintain under the calm, relentless pressure of Rossi's questions. "Tell me about your mother, Alara," Rossi began, her voice soft, almost motherly. "What was she like?" Alara recited the lines she and Marcus had rehearsed. She spoke of her mother's kindness, her quiet nature, but also her anxiety and her tendency to be overwhelmed. "Overwhelmed by what?" Rossi pressed gently. "Just life, I guess," Alara mumbled, staring at the table. "That must have been hard for you. Did you talk to anyone about it? Your stepfather, maybe?" "Marcus. He understood," Alara said. "He helped me. He helped us both." Rossi leaned forward. "Alara, I'm going to be honest with you. Some things in this story aren't adding up. The late-night drive your stepfather took. The fact that your mother's phone has been off since Friday evening. The fact that her credit cards haven't been used. People who decide to walk away from their lives usually need money." Alara began to fidget, twisting a loose thread on her sweater. "I don't know anything about that." "I think you do," Rossi said, her voice still quiet but now with an edge of steel. "I think you're a very smart, very talented young woman. I saw the sketches in your room. You have a real gift. But I also think you're in a terrible situation, and you're trying to protect someone. But sometimes, the people we think are protecting us are actually the ones hurting us the most." Rossi let the words sink in. She was driving a wedge of her own, trying to find the real Ilera buried beneath Marcus's programming. For the first time, Ilera's eyes filled with genuine tears. Tears not of performance, but of confusion and fear. The two realities, the one Marcus had built and the one that was now crashing down on her, were at war in her mind. The case broke wide open when a forensic team did a thorough search of the house and the SUV. Despite their cleaning, they found a tiny, pinhead-sized speck of blood on the grout between the tiles in the garage. The DNA matched Helena. Then, using a specialized light source, they found faint traces of bleach residue in the cargo area of Marcus's SUV, indicating a massive cleanup effort. But the final, damning piece of evidence came from an unexpected source: Dr. Albright. Troubled by the news of Helena's disappearance, he reviewed his records. He found it odd that Ilera, a girl with no history of anxiety, had suddenly developed such a severe case, a case that required a dosage of sedatives far more potent than he was normally comfortable prescribing for a teenager. He called Detective Rossi. When Rossi learned about the sedative prescriptions, all the pieces clicked into place. The late-night drive, the missing mother, the bleached SUV, the daughter's strange demeanor. She finally had enough. They arrested Marcus at his office and brought Ilera in for questioning again, this time laying out the evidence on the table in front of her. The security footage stills, the lab report on the bloodstain, Dr. Albright's statement. "We know what happened, Ilera," Rossi said calmly. "We know about the sedatives. We know she never left the house. The only thing I don't know is why. Marcus has a reason. There's a life insurance policy. But you're her daughter. You loved her. Help me understand why." The dam broke. Away from Marcus, confronted with the cold, hard facts of her complicity, the shared delusion shattered. The world Marcus had constructed crumbled into dust, and the stark, hideous reality of what she had done rushed in. A gut-wrenching, animalistic sob tore from her throat. The story poured out of her, a torrent of manipulated love, of twisted logic, of secrets and lies and a horror she could no longer contain. She confessed everything. The plan, the pills, the drive into the country. And she confessed to the final, unthinkable act. He said it was a kindness. She wept, her body shaking uncontrollably. He said she would be at peace. He made me help. I held her feet. The trial was a media sensation. The story of the beautiful, charming architect and his young, artistic stepdaughter, who had conspired to commit such a barbaric crime, captivated and horrified the nation. Marcus, ever the performer, maintained his innocence to the end, trying to pin the entire murder on Ilera, portraying her as a disturbed, obsessive teenager who had killed her mother in a fit of rage. But Ilera's confession, detailed and corroborated by the evidence, was too powerful. The jury saw Marcus for what he was: a manipulative sociopath who had groomed a vulnerable girl and turned her into a monster. In the end, they were both found guilty of first-degree murder. Marcus was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Ilera, because of her age and the clear evidence of psychological manipulation, was given a lesser, though still substantial, sentence. Detective Rossi attended the sentencing. She watched as Ilera, no longer the cold, detached girl from the early interviews but a broken, haunted young woman, was led from the courtroom. Their eyes met for a moment, and in Ilera's gaze, Rossi saw the true, tragic scope of the crime. Marcus hadn't just taken one life that night. He had destroyed two. He had murdered Helena, and he had murdered the person Ilera was meant to be. The perfect house on Sycamore Lane was eventually sold. The azaleas still bloomed in the spring, and the maple tree still turned to fire in the fall. But for those who knew the story, it was no longer a portrait of the suburban dream. It was a monument to a waking nightmare, a quiet, constant reminder of the darkness that can fester behind a closed door, and of a daughter's love so terribly, ruthlessly betrayed.